Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. Today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to for a while. I'm joined by licensed therapist Julie Honeycutt, and we're exploring what it means to become your own primary caregiver. If you've been following along with our series on emotionally healthy relationships, this episode really serves as a kind of anchor or container for all the relational skills we've been exploring. In our conversation, Julie and I dive into the inner work that makes healthy connection possible. We talk about the parts of us that show up in relationships, what it looks like to slow down and turn inward, and how we can begin to build trust with ourselves instead of outsourcing our own growth and healing. It's a conversation about reactivity, self-leadership, and the beautiful but sometimes difficult process of learning to show up for your own wounded parts with compassion. This is definitely a note-taking episode, and I'm so grateful for Julie's insight and the way she beautifully balances the complexity of this inner work while still making it feel accessible. Listen in. Well, Julia, I'd love to start off our conversation by hearing a little bit about your story. So I know you're a therapist and you're passionate about the integration of soul care, Christian formation, and professional counseling. So would you mind telling us a little bit about what initially drew you into the work of therapy?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me, Taylor. I became a Christian in junior high. I was 12 years old, and it was through the Southern Baptist Church. And in this particular church, the emphasis was service. And so by 14, I had decided to devote my future to full-time ministry. I did not know what it was going to look like yet, but I just knew that I wanted every aspect of my life to be focused on helping others, but specifically through a Christ-centered lens. So then in high school, I became that friend that everybody went to with their problems. I guess I was just a natural listener and I cared. I just genuinely wanted to help people. I am a 2 on the Enneagram for any of your listeners who are familiar with the Enneagram, as many are, and definitely showed in my high school years as I was, coming into trying to figure out what it meant for me to be a Christian and what that looked like. As a young Christian without really having like a home environment to shape that and teach me. So I was at church a lot looking for basically, spiritual parents. And so I ended up going to a private Baptist college down in Mississippi and then on to seminary. And that's where the seminary degree was in marriage and family therapy, and where I learned, oh, this is definitely what I want to do with my life. And so just being able to sit with people and listen, and also offer, whatever the Spirit might be sharing with me in the moment, and just that flow of the process. And it was also in seminary that I learned the internal family systems model of therapy, and was fortunate enough to be able to be in a training with all other believers. Yeah, it was a group of 30 of us, and it ranged from grad students to professors. So a very wide range of age and life experience. And that just really helped me find the path to integrating my faith with a deeper psychology. We'll get into more of that in our episode today.
Yeah, I love that. Well, as you know, we've been in a podcast series on exploring emotionally healthy relationships. And today I'd love to begin here, that we were created in the image of a relational, triune God, Father, Son, and Spirit. So in what ways does this Trinitarian view of God shape how we understand and engage in relationship with ourselves and with others?
Yeah, I love that starting point. Genesis, right? Let's start at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning. So when we think about being made in the image of God, the aspect of that I like to emphasize is multiplicity, that our God is three in one, and they are three distinct essences and people. And we are parts, and that we are made basically in the image of the Trinity. And because of that multiplicity, it makes sense that we have parts. And of course, Paul talks about this too, in our many members and so forth. So in relationship, though, when we see that God is perfectly in relationship with himself, right? He's perfect harmony, no polarizations, no inner conflict, no tension within himself. However, because of the fall and our own burdens, we will not, on this side of heaven, experience that perfect harmony, but we do get to have a glimpse of it. And I believe that's the abundant life that Jesus talks about. One of the pieces of the abundant life is, even in that same passage, I think, is when he goes on to say, my peace I leave you, my peace I give you, not as the world gives. So that inner peace, that perfect harmony that the Trinity models for us, we get to have a taste of that.
Yeah, that's so good. I know that as we were emailing back and forth in preparation for this episode, there was a phrase you used that really stuck with me. You said, others are our tour mentors. So, can you unpack what you mean by that? And if I'm hearing the layers in that phrase correctly, how do you see relationships as both a source of wounding and a pathway to healing?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a professor in seminary say that we are hurt in relationship, but we are also healed in relationship. And I think that also speaks to, there's no Lone Ranger Christian. There's many ways that we can worship and not go to church now, especially with our technologies. But that means that we're only limping. We're only a part way a Christian living out our faith, because we're not in full relationship with people who are also fellow believers. So, as much as it pains us to be in church communities or social situations where we've been hurt, these are opportunities to consider, what is God teaching me through these difficult people? And so, Dr. Schwartz, the founder of the Internal Family Systems Model of Therapy, IFS for short, he wrote a book for couples that has been actually applied to lots of different relationships, friendships, mother-daughter, etc. And in this book, he introduces this paradoxical perspective of what it means to be a tormentor, and what it means to have a tormentor, right? To be tormented is not fun. And if you stay in any community, whether it's a church community or otherwise, at some point you will experience some torment, because that's just the nature of being in relationship with people. So the idea of seeing other people who are rubbing you the wrong way or outright being rude, who knows what the circumstances are, no matter what it is, we have an opportunity to humble ourselves and ask the question, okay, how are they tormenting me? Which the mentor part is that U turn to consider, oh, they're actually mentoring me in, the hard knocks of life. They're mentoring me toward humility. They're mentoring me toward, reconciliation, possibly.
That's so good. As I've sat with that phrase, I've been reflecting on my own relationships and community right now, and it's made me wonder, how might someone discern what their current relationships are revealing about their inner world? Like, how can the dynamics we're experiencing with others help us recognize wounded parts of ourselves that might still need
Yeah.
attention or healing?
I think discerning that when we get our feelings hurt, what did we contribute,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think this is tricky because you've got the type of personality. I tend to fall into this where I just assume I'm at
It's
fault.
always my
Like
fault.
if my feelings are hurt, it's not the other person. It's somehow my fault, right? And that's a posture of power, right? Because if it's my fault, then I actually have the power to change something, right? I have the power to like adjust it accordingly. But if it's someone else's fault, I'm a victim to whatever hurt they have inflicted upon me. And that's not a position of a posture of power. But it certainly is what's real. So sometimes it's best to think about 50-50. It doesn't matter the split, but the point is that in every conflict, I'm contributing something to the conflict, and the other person is contributing something to the conflict, and looking at what are we contributing. This might be a good time. I have a favorite quote by an early church father. His name is St. John Chrysostom, and he was the very first archbishop of Christianity in the 4th century. And he says this about conflict: do not fear the conflict, and do not flee from it. Where there is no struggle, there is no virtue. Where faith and love are not tempted and put to the test, it is not possible to be sure whether they are really present, meaning virtue being really present. Virtue is proved and revealed in adversity. Yeah, so like when our wounded parts are dominating, and we can't look past our hurt, that's the indication that those parts are burdened and that those parts are needing a healing presence, ideally through Christ first and then others second. And that leads to Dr. Schwartz's one of my other favorite things that he talks about is how that I feel like is relevant to Christians, is that we are our own primary caretaker. That if I've got my feelings hurt, I need to deal with that myself first before I go complaining, um, for example, to my husband of like, okay, thanks for bringing that in when it broke, but did you clean up the mess from it? And it's like, okay, well, what part of me expected him to do all that? And so a lot of times hurt can come back to having my own unrealistic expectations of the people in my life. Like my expectations from my younger self, which are the ones that typically get their feelings hurt so easily, is you should know what I need. You should, there's a whole bunch of assumptions and like the mind reading that you talked about in your episode with Carly, right? And how these wounded selves, these wounded parts of us, when they are in the driver's seat, then that's when conflict is no longer productive. And so with the internal family systems model, we have methods and a lot of the skills that you and Carly talked about to be able to slow it down and really take a look inside of, okay, what's my contribution? How can I be my own primary caretaker? And then go to the person that hurt my feelings and talk to them about what happened.
So many questions are coming to my mind right now as we're talking about this. But maybe going off the idea of our wounded parts showing up in relationships, especially in moments of conflict, I'd love to talk about reactivity. So, what are some common ways that we can tend to deflect or project our stress outward rather than slowing down and turning inward?
Yeah. What are some of the ways? That could be a podcast in and of itself, right? So,
Yeah.
um, blaming is a big one. Blame shifting, when we feel our own shame and we can't tolerate that, and so then we say, well, then that person is to blame. It's their fault. Projecting expectations, as I mentioned a minute ago, that even anger, like if I'm mad at myself about something, it's likely that I'm going to be mad at my partner about something, because the two may not even be related, but it's that whole adage of having a hard day at work, you come home and kick the dog. It's like, well, what did the dog do? Absolutely nothing, but I needed to take it out on someone. Anxiety is another one that I think goes under the radar quite a bit in relationship. That if if I'm feeling anxious about something, that my presence to people is not going to be peaceful, and so it can show up. I mean, anxiety is one of those, like I said, it goes undetected because it can show up in so many ways. It can be like, wow, they're really quiet. Oh, and we wouldn't even think that to call that anxiety. Or they could just be a Tasmanian devil and just like always moving very quickly. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe they're anxious about something. So we can project onto people quite a bit in lots of ways that we may not even realize we're doing.
Yeah, that's so good. I know you just mentioned the concept of the U turn, and so I'd love for you to walk us through what that looks like in a relational dynamic, especially when we're feeling reactive.
Yeah.
So, what does it look like to do the U turn inward?
Yeah. Okay. So, first, let me say that this principle of the U turn is Matthew 7, 100%. Right? That's where Jesus is talking about get the speck out of your, don't focus on the speck in your brother's eye, right? Focus on the log that's in your own eye. And we can't do that if we're constantly projecting and assuming it's someone else's fault, and like getting into our victim part, that oftentimes just wants to blame another person. So the first thing, so it's best to use like a specific example. So let's assume my feelings are hurt and I'm feeling totally justified in these hurt feelings, and the other person is just blatantly wrong. Just objectively, anybody I'm looking on at the situation would say, man, they are wrong. um, I still owe it to myself and owe it to the relationship to stop and take a pause and look at what's going on inside of me, to what feels so justified, and why does that feel so good to be so right. And then finding the parts of me that are dominating the situation, so these hurt parts, and unblend from them. So in that dynamic, I literally, like, let's say I'm having an argument with my husband. He's going to be my example of choice because he's the closest person to me. But this could apply to any friendship. It could apply to mother-daughter relationship, parent-child, whatever, pastor, parishioner. I mean, it could be any relationship. But let's say my husband has hurt my feelings. I might then say to him, probably not in a very calm way, just to be honest here, right? I might say to him, I don't like how this conversation is going. I'm going to take a timeout. And it's probably going to be pretty curt like that, right? So I'm going to leave the room and I'm going to sit down for a minute and breathe, right? So that's what it means to slow down and take the pause. And then I start to listen to what's going on inside of me. And in this scenario that we're playing with, I'm hurt. And so I then might turn to prayer and say, Lord, I know my husband loves me. He did not intend to hurt me. I believe what is true. And I don't like him very much right now. And so I'm asking you, Lord, to be my comforter, right? Because that's, in John 14 is one of my favorite references. Hebrews 13 is another one of the comforter coming to be with us as a helper. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 is another one. Like, there's so many places in scripture where we're encouraged to lean on the Lord, specifically the Holy Spirit, to comfort us in these times of hurt. Now, one of my ways of praying in those moments is, because my husband has a relationship with our Trinitarian God, I'm encouraged. I can pray, Lord, speak to him. You tell him how much he hurt me. You be my mouthpiece, because I trust that my husband is listening to the spirit within him. And Taylor, I can tell you on more than two hands the number of times when this has resolved a circumstance where my husband has come back to me and said, "Listen, I'm sorry." I haven't even had to tell him that my feelings were hurt, or flesh it out and get into the nit and grit of why my feelings were hurt. That's best case scenario. Let me go back to worst case scenario. So I'm praying, Lord, comfort me. Lord, talk to my husband, convince him that he's wrong, and show me my own pride. Right? Show me where I feel justified in my hurt, and that my hurt isn't the full reality of this relationship. That relationships are not a tit for tat of how many hurts and repairs have happened. So it comes back to that posture of humility again. So then once I feel recentered and have had enough time, depending on the degree of the rupture, then I would go back to the person who hurt my feelings. And, depending on what's appropriate, I might just say, I spent some time taking care of my hurt. I just want you to know that it would mean a lot to me if you could understand where the hurt, where you hurt me. But if you can't see that, it's okay. I'm not depending on you anymore to be able to make myself okay. Yeah. And that's what it means to be your own primary caregiver and letting other people be a secondary caregiver.
Yeah, that's so good. As you're talking, I'm thinking about myself and maybe some of our listeners who are just beginning to pay attention to and track their inner experience as you've been modeling for us. And I know it can feel so fast and so overwhelming at first.
Right.
So, how do we begin to slow down? And what does that process look like when we're maybe operating so fast that we feel really disconnected from what's happening inside?
Yeah. Journaling is one of my go-tos. And I don't mean I'm not against getting on the computer and writing out our feelings there. In fact, I think when it's rapid, sometimes that's the best place to start. But eventually putting pen to paper, there's journal therapy research out there that shows the effectiveness of putting pen to paper because it forces us to slow down. And that's when we're in the place where we're ready to listen to what our parts are saying, what our soul is saying about a relationship rupture. When we journal, it really helps us hear what's happening inside. So that's a very practical answer to your question about how do we slow down. I think bigger picture and maybe a little less practical is just it's a lifestyle choice. That slowing down in general helps us then slow down in our relationships or in our own self-reflection. And I mean, so one of the things I used to teach quite regularly in one of my workshops had a whole section on slowing down. And I said the one takeaway I want you all to try, so I'm going to invite your listeners to this: walk slowly. When you're going about life and doing your day-to-day stuff, if you slow down your pace, your literal physical pace, you might notice your anxiety go down. And then you might notice that life is happening. You're not having to race from one thing to the next to make life happen. Like, we are invited to participate in life that's already happening. So it's a theological posture of what it means to live life. And I'm just a huge advocate for slowing down in general.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm thinking of a question that might take us a slightly different direction, so feel free to steer us back if needed. But I'm thinking about the concept of being our own primary caregiver. And it seems like there's a level of internal trust required in that, and like trusting that my own self can move towards my wounded parts. But so often I've noticed in my own experience and in sitting with others and hearing their experiences, how often we can outsource some of that wisdom and internal trust to maybe authority figures or other people in our lives. So when thinking about the process of building that internal trust, what does that look like?
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Such a good question to name, okay, what's actually happening inside to where we can become a primary caretaker. And so I'm glad you circled back to that, because it certainly is not something that happens overnight, and it does require a lot of practice. So I think the best place to start, if you're not able to get into therapy, like therapy can help a tremendous amount with this trusting yourself bit. But for a lot of people, therapy is not an option. And so we can all practice intentional self-talk. Right. And so it's in what, 2 Corinthians 10, where Paul is talking about taking our thoughts captive, renewing our mind. I think that's in Romans, right? That the battle, so to speak, is in the mind. It's in our interior life. So making the process of slowing down and paying attention to your thoughts and feelings, um, for many people, it's a spiritual discipline. And I heard you and Carly talk about the importance of paying attention to what's going on inside. And that's the first step. The first step is awareness. We cannot be intentional unless we're first aware. So intentional self-talk, let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So let's say those hurt parts of me from my previous scenario, it just won't stop. Like I'm ruminating, I'm crying, I've journaled, I've done all the things, and I'm still not able to regulate. I'm still not able to unblend from that hurt part of me.
Can you explain what unblending means for listeners who might be unfamiliar with
Yes.
that term?
Regulate. It means regulating. That's the best, simplest. Yeah. So if I'm listening inside and I'm journaling, like, oh, I can't believe he treated me that way. I'm so offended and hurt. I feel like he doesn't even hear me or see me, and like all the hurt. These are the hurt things that this part might be saying. The intentional self-talk would be to actually respond back with compassion. And we in prayer, I'm asking God, comfort this part of me. But then God gives us a core self. Like our core self is the pure reflection of our God image. And so that aspect of ourselves, that core self, can talk directly to our wounded self. And sometimes the wounded self won't trust the core self. And that's okay. That's definitely when a therapist is needed, or even a spiritual director. They can be helpful with that too. So when that intentional self-talk happens and the wounded self, the wounded part, actually feels seen and heard, and it's attuned to internally, either by core self or by God, then that regulation can happen, where I might be able to stop crying for a minute, or be able to, in that space, I'm unblended. I'm no longer hijacked by all the emotion. That's another way to think about unblending. And so when we do that connection of self to part on repeat, in other words, when we can do that over and over and over, being intentional with how we talk to ourselves, then there's trust that gets built. And that internal trust starts to have a ripple effect, to where, one, my hurt feelings are less needy, like less dependent on other people, outsourcing. I love how you put that. And our internal dialogue turns compassionate, right? And whenever our internal dialogue is compassionate, we're embodying more and more of the Holy Spirit and the image of God within us.
As we begin to wrap up, I've been thinking about the relational skills that Carly and I have explored in this series, and we still have a few more coming after this episode. But as I've been listening to you today, it feels like what we've been talking about offers a kind of container or maybe like a grounding framework that helps us hold and integrate all of these relational skills together. So, how would you describe the role of this inner work that we've talked about today as the container that makes those relational skills possible or sustainable? Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, I think so. If I didn't get it, let me know. So we can't expect ourselves to take a pause and slow down, recognize our hurt part or whatever part, maybe it's anger or blame, recognize our own parts without practice. And the space that's created once we start to track our parts and slow down tracking, by the way, tracking parts is simply making a list. It doesn't even have to be in a journal. It could just be on a scrap piece of paper, whatever's handy in the moment. When you have that awareness, it's like, oh yeah, it's a section on your phone. That's great. Yes. So without these basic fundamental practices of learning how to create a slowed down pace of our emotional world, we cannot put into practice the practical tools and skills that you and Carly have unpacked so beautifully, I might add. I've been able to listen to several of those episodes. And all of those skills that you guys are teaching about, this detecting parts and unblending them from them, and being your own primary caretaker and tracking them, right? Sometimes that's a precursor to being able to actually access a new skill, a communication skill, especially when we're in the heat of conflict. And that's where taking the time out just becomes so foundational, so critical to healthy relationships. But it can be hard to do if the other person is not in agreement that a timeout is what's best. So that can be a very difficult thing to negotiate. And it's usually best to negotiate it outside of the moment of conflict. So early in my marriage, my husband, after a fight, we would oftentimes sit down and be like, hey, what did we learn? Right? What did we learn about what just happened, yesterday? And that's usually, it would be at least 24 hours when we would have that conversation so that our emotions could we could get some space from our emotions.
Yeah, so good. Well, as a final question, I'd love for you to share a little bit about the IFS workshop that you
Yeah.
and your husband are hosting next month. That's actually how we first connected. So I'd love for listeners to hear more. What can people expect from the experience, and what are you hoping attendees will take away from
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. We're excited to be able to share a Christian approach to the internal family systems model of therapy. Many therapists and non-therapists, they actually have a track. A lot of people don't know this, that you can get trained in the model um, and not be a therapist. They're called practitioners. So a lot of people who have gone through the trainings as Christians end up reaching out to us. My husband's also an IFS trained therapist. So they end up reaching out to us saying, hey, I got this training, but I'm not really sure how it fits with my faith. And that has just become, we get that question so much over the last 2 decades that's just become like the central focus of my workshops. And I'm grateful that my husband has agreed to do this one with me. He's a pastor as well. And so that's been where he's put most of his energy professionally, so to speak. And so this time he's back in private practice, and this time he's gonna co-lead this workshop with me. And I'm sure we'll be giving all kinds of funny examples. But the focus is going to be, how can we, like, back to like what I was saying earlier, how can we make these practices part of our lifestyle? Right? These practices of pausing, slowing down, tracking what's happening inside, and then taking that to prayer before we run to the other person to try to fix how we're feeling.
Yes, so the workshop is happening August 22nd and 23rd, 2025. So it's coming up in about 6 weeks. And I've actually been watching the recording of your last workshop, which is similar to this one, and it's so good. So I really encourage anyone who's interested to register. There are both in-person and online options available. So I'm going to include the link in the show notes for anyone who's interested. But I'm just so thankful for your time today, Julie. Thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate you having me. It's been a delightful conversation.
Wasn't that so good? I love how Julie integrates psychology and theology in such beautiful and thoughtful ways. As I mentioned in our conversation, I'd love for you to join us at the IFS workshop happening August 22nd and 23rd, 2025 at Crosspoint Church in Lynchburg, Virginia. I'm working alongside Julie to help coordinate the conference, and I'd love to see you there. The workshop is specifically designed for therapists and mental health professionals, spiritual directors and ministry leaders, and students pursuing degrees in ministry or mental health. If that's you, and if you're curious to learn more, be sure to check out the link in the show notes for how to register. Next week, Carly and I will be back with another relational skill, one that she often says is her favorite. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you're notified when new episodes are released, and I'll see you next week. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.